Today we will visit Mikhailovsky Castle, the imperial residence which is atypical in architecture for buildings of the late 18th century. Mikhailovsky Castle is a kind of portrait of the most romantic emperor of Russia, who considered himself a knight on the throne and dreamed of living in a knight's castle. Paul I can be called the most controversial emperor in the history of the Russian Empire. He was the unloved child of Catherine II by her unloved husband Peter III. He was separated from his parents and raised by the Empress Elizabeth. Catherine II, having got rid of her husband Peter III in a palace coup, would follow Elizabeth's example and separate her grandson Alexander from Paul I, hoping to raise him and put him on the throne, bypassing her son Paul I. Paul I grew up in the absence of parental love and the atmosphere of coldness of the courtiers. Later he was a constant object of ridicule by Catherine II's favorites. Catherine II's favorites had considerably more power in the empire than he, the legitimate heir, and this could not but hurt Paul I. His removal from power and the assassination of his father Peter III developed in him a pathological suspicion. He was irascible and unbalanced. He was a constant fear of assassination attempts by his own mother and her cronies. But Catherine II died suddenly and Paul I became Emperor of Russia to the age of 42. After the death of Catherine II, the lives of the nobility and high-ranking officers in the empire changed dramatically. Paul I was a very weird ruler for his entourage. The emperor's punishments and rewards were unpredictable for the nobles and officers. These punishments didn't affect the ordinary soldiers and peasants. Moreover, he even made life a little easier for the peasants. Not surprisingly, Paul I enjoyed relative popularity among the lower classes, who even rejoiced when they heard news that another aristocrat had fallen into disgrace. But in times of absolute power, the main thing was to gain the support of not ordinary people, but the aristocrats, who were the backbone of the regime. Catherine II, unlike Paul I, understood this perfectly well. Paul I deprived the nobles of their former privileges. He made them pay taxes again, he forced them to serve in the army, and even extended corporal punishment to them. In addition, Paul I was irascible, impulsive, and made a number of strange decisions that were incomprehensible to his entourage. He began to interfere in the personal lives of the aristocrats, and even regulated what clothes they couldn't wear. He also regulated how they should behave. For example, he forbade applause, the wearing of sideburns, round hats, waistcoats, clogs, and detachable collars. He forbade the use of certain words, such as club, fatherland, freedom, and so on. Among the high-ranking persons whose interests were affected by the actions of Paul I began to grow a desire to remove Paul I from power. Paradoxically, the organizer of the coup against Paul I was his closest aide, Count Peter Palin, who held many government positions and had enormous power in the empire. He and his co-conspirators decided to transfer power from Paul I to the emperor's son Alexander. Alexander, the son of Paul I, was apprised of the ideas to overthrow his father. The elite actively cultivated in Alexander I the belief that this undertaking was the only way to save the empire, which Paul I would inevitably destroy. Alexander I was sure that Paul I would only sign an abdication in his favor, but the officers and nobles who took part in the coup most likely realized that if they didn't kill Paul I, he was relying on ordinary soldiers supporting the emperor, would take revenge on them. Nevertheless, the participants of the coup who broke into the bedroom offered Paul I to sign an abdication. Paul I refused to do so. Then Count Nikolai Zubov struck the emperor in the temple with a heavy gold snuff box. Then Paul I was strangled with an officer's scarf. It should be noted that Nikolai Zubov in his time was the first to bring Paul I news that the Empress Catherine II died, and now he will become an emperor, for what he was gifted with various posts and preferences. That is, the reign of Paul I began with Nikolai Zubov and ended with him. Thus, Paul I is a stark illustration of how important it is for an authoritarian leader to find a common language with the elite, with the oligarchs, I would say. Paul I failed to do so and lost his throne and his life. In Paul I's opinion, the Mikhailovsky Castle was to provide him with security. But from the moment the castle was built, until his death, the emperor lived here with his family and entourage for only 40 days. The bedroom where Paul I was murdered was turned into a house church. The lift bridges of the castle were removed and the water channels were filled in. The castle began to lose its original appearance and was later turned into a kind of large communal apartment. Various court officials were given apartments here, various state organizations were located here, some of the halls were used as storage rooms, a Muslim prayer room was organized in the Maltese throne room. Later, the building was repurposed to serve the requirements of the engineering school. This is the sad fate of Russia's strangest emperor and his castle.